In this video, we'll be covering exercises 4 through 7 on page 209 in your student journal. We are going to need to reference these ways to show that a quadrilateral is a parallelogram. And so you might want to have this chart handy as you work through these examples. You can find this on page 208. So on page 209, in 4, 5, 6, and 7, we need to find the values of x and y that make the quadrilateral a parallelogram. And so in each of these, we have to figure out what properties do we know about parallelograms and how to prove that they're parallelograms to help us set up some equations to solve for x and y. So in number 4, my x and y values, they're part of some angles. So I know I'm going to have to think about, what do I know about angles in a parallelogram? Well, one thing I know is that opposite angles in a parallelogram are congruent. And so one thing I know is this 3x minus 20 degree angle must be equal to 4y degrees. Now, those are two variables, and so I can't set up one equation with two variables in it. I won't be able to solve it. So first I want to think about maybe how do I relate these two angles that both have an x in it. These two angles are adjacent. They're next to each other. One thing we learned about parallelograms is that adjacent angles, they're not necessarily congruent, but they are, I'm going to put a little note to myself, they are supplementary. So I know they have to add up to 180 degrees. This allows me to set up an equation. I know that 3x minus 20 degrees, if I add that with x plus 40 degrees, it should equal 180 degrees. I can solve this equation because there's only one variable in this equation. I'm going to combine some like terms here. I can combine the x terms and negative 20 and 40. So 3x plus 1x is 4x. Negative 20 plus 40 is positive 20. I'll subtract 20 from both sides. And then divide both sides by 4 to get a value of x that is 40. So I found one of my variables. I still need to find y. So remember, I couldn't do anything with these two angles because I had two different variables. Now I know x is 40, so I can plug it in for x to actually get an angle measure for this particular angle. So 3 times 40 minus 20 will get me that angle measure. And when I do that, I get 100 degrees. Well, remember we said opposite angles are congruent, and so 4y degrees must be equal to 100. I can solve this equation by dividing both sides by 4, and I can see that my y value, it must be 25. All right, number 5, it's kind of hard to see. They've really made this quadrilateral quite skinny, but you will notice that these lengths, they're pointing to the diagonals of the parallelogram. Okay. And so we have to think about, what do we know about the diagonals in a parallelogram? We know the diagonals bisect each other, meaning they cut each other into two congruent pieces. So 6x, this length, must be equal to 4x plus 10. That's one equation I can set up. Oops. I also know that this diagonal got bisected, and so 2y must be equal in length to y plus 1. So I have two equations here that I can solve for x and y. I'll go ahead and do that. And I have both my x and my y values in number 5. And number 6, to find x and y, x is on some side lengths. So first I should figure out how do these two side lengths compare, or what's the relationship between them. I can tell that these two opposite sides are parallel. And so I know if this is a parallelogram, one thing I know also about these two opposite sides is that they have to be congruent. They have to be equal in measure. So 10x plus 7 must be equal to 12x minus 9. I can go ahead and solve this equation for x. I get x is equal to 8. If I went a little fast, you can always pause, rewind the video. I'm not taking too much time to explain each step when I solve the equations. Okay. All right, to find y. Y is the measure of this angle here. I also know this angle is 106 degrees. We know that in a parallelogram, opposite angles are congruent. So y must be equal to 106 degrees. In our very last problem, in this particular quadrilateral, they give us information about side lengths. We know that in a parallelogram, opposite sides must be congruent. So 4y plus 2 must be equal to 70. These two opposite sides must also be congruent. So 5x plus 16 must be equal to 6x minus 1. I can go ahead and solve these equations for x and y. Again, if I do this too quickly, you can pause the video. I get y is equal to 17. Oops, not plus 17, plus 1. And I get x is also equal to 17.